Welcome to On the Porch, the podcast. Thanks for joining us. That was Estill County, Kentucky's favorite daughter, Sonora May, doing No Sweet Thing from her new album. Before that was Watch House, formerly known as Mandolin Orange, doing New Star. And we have a special guest here in the studio with us today. Jayne Moore Waldrop is here to talk about her new book, Drowned Town. Jayne is a native of Western Kentucky with deep roots in Eastern Kentucky. She's also lived and practiced law in Louisville and is now a central part of Lexington's literary community. Besides her new book, she's also written 2 books of poetry, Retracing My Steps and Pandemic Lent, a season in poems. She's a finalist for the Reynolds Price Fiction Prize, the Tilly Olson Fiction Award, and many other honors. I loved Waldrop's new book, Drowned Town, for many reasons, but among them is how memorable and enduring her characters are, her rich sense of place, her exploration of class, race, and the way a place can set up residence in us, and much more. It's a book you will not forget, but I don't want to give too much of it away because I want Jayne to talk a little bit about it. So welcome to On the Porch, Jayne.
Thank you, Silas, and I'm so thrilled to be here.
I'm glad to have you here. Well, first of all, why don't you tell us what a drowned town is?
Okay, a drowned town is a place that has been submerged after a river has been dammed. And usually the dam is built for hydroelectric power or for flood control or all those reasons. And many of us are familiar with those dams and the resulting reservoirs through the Tennessee Valley Authority or the Corps of Engineers, lakes and dams.
Right. Well, what do you want listeners out there to know about the book?
The book has 2 really strong female characters, and the friendship that takes them from their college days when they meet into middle age. Mm-hmm. And they are dissimilar. One comes from the city, one from a rural area in Western Kentucky. But their friendship is sort of a yin and yang kind of relationship that carries them through their lives.
Right. They're interesting because they're sort of opposites, but they have such a deep unconditional love. It's like they balance each other out.
Right, they do. So the book is set primarily in Western Kentucky, also in Louisville and in Nashville. But it's set around the historic events that occurred around the building of Kentucky Lake, Lake Barkley, and the taking of the land previously known as Between the Rivers to become the Land Between the Lakes National Recreation Area. So there was enormous environmental change in Western Kentucky in the mid-20th century. Mm-hmm. So, this history isn't well known. If you know Western Kentucky at all, you know it's a place of these giant lakes and in this beautiful recreation area. But all those signs of progress came at great cost to the people who lived there and who lost their communities and their culture and their history in many ways.
Right. So it did give recreation and a new sort of economy to the area.
Yes.
And I guess flood control, right?
Yes.
Was part
all those
of it.
really necessary things that are done for the public good and in the public interest. But as I started looking into that history, I started realizing that the sacrifice and the loss of home and place is so important in that region. You see these lakes and they look as though they've been there forever, but they're not natural lakes. They are, human created, and that came at a great cost for some people.
Well, now you grew up in Paducah.
I did.
So how did you come to know the Land Between the Lakes area and Kentucky Lake and Lake Barkley so well?
Well, I grew up in Paducah. I didn't have really any family connections to the lake areas, but I was one of those beneficiaries of this progress because I grew up with access to these wonderful lakes, for my own recreation. I grew up going to Land Between the Lakes and loved that. It's a big part of my life as far as how I connect to nature. and how I love being outdoors and the hiking and just, it's a big part of my background and my preferences on how I spend my own recreational time. So that's how I got to know it. But as an adult, I also got to know it by doing research and seeing signs of what used to be there as I walked along the shoreline in Old Catawba, which is one of those drowned towns, or actually a half-drowned town, because there are a few remaining houses there that face the lake. And they were at one time in a really bustling small town on the Cumberland River. So I was walking along the shoreline and saw these signs of what used to be there. There are house foundations and slabs of asphalt that are still stuck to the earth. You can see these signs when the water is at its lowest at Winter Pool. So it seemed as though that is the history of the area, but it's fairly recent history. It felt very close to see these signs of what used to exist there.
Right. What you picked in advance to read to us, it has something to do with that, doesn't it? Or is that right?
Yes.
Would you want to share that with us?
Sure. A lone bronze marker revealed the spot's history as the former site of Eddyville, a thriving town settled near a series of bends in the Cumberland River, which snakes a course through the middle of the country, from mountains to barrens to rolling hills. The plaque told the town's role in American history as an outpost on the western frontier, as an important junction during the Civil War, as a commercial center and county seat. The tarnished words also described mid-century government projects for flood control, hydroelectric power, and tourism when the flowing river was dammed. The sign memorialized U.S. presidents, vice presidents, and governors from Kentucky and Tennessee, but failed to mention the people who had lived in the town and given up their homes as the giant lake rose. They had been told their sacrifice was for the public good. They were never told how much they would miss it or for how long. Cam wondered if the adults had realized what they were losing when everyone was moved out. At the time, she had been a child, not privy to their conversations about the relocation. Maybe some folks jumped at the chance to leave this place and its floodwaters, where the river crawled out of its bed and slipped into town at least once a year, usually in late winter or spring. They had tired of shoveling mud-caked streets and sidewalks, pumping out perennially musty, wet basements, and moving furniture to the attic. The chance to live on higher ground lured them away, enticed by the gift of free land for those who committed to build in a town that sprouted in a cornfield 2 miles away. Others had fought the taking of their land, but without success. In the end, everyone was forced out.
Well, you mentioned in there the people. And one thing I love about the book is you talk about how, the governors are remembered and these, et cetera, but the people who really made up the place are just sort of forgotten and erased and totally erased in a big way by the water.
Right.
And so one thing I love so much about this book is that you give those people voices, right? And you, so some of the characters are people who are lived there before the lake.
Yes.
The lakes come, and some are much later who are enjoying the lake. And so there's this juxtaposition and an awareness of the past all through it. But like we referenced earlier, our two main characters are best friends who are really different. So let's talk a little bit about Margaret, because she's such an interesting character because she's an anti-hero. And she's... Sometimes we just get frustrated with her and want to shake her, but we also have an insight into her vulnerabilities, which makes us ultimately love her. So it's just one of the most complex character creations I've ever seen.
Thank you. Yeah, she's not very likable in many ways.
Yeah, but she's real, right? I mean,
right.
Sometimes the unlikable things about her are also things that we sort of might not say out loud, but She sometimes says out loud what I want to say, but I was raised not to, right?
Right. She's pretty unfiltered in her
Right.
her reactions to other people.
Yes.
In her relationships with other people.
And so even when she's being hateful and, and ill-tempered and things like that, there's still something endearing about it in some strange way. Is she just totally, a figment of your imagination, or is she lots of people put together in a dose of fiction, or what?
Yeah, I think she is. I think she's an amalgam of, people that, because I practiced law for a long time, I've seen really demanding people. and especially when they're under stress and a lot of pressure to get things done, some of the not very desirable personality traits come out. So Margaret is just sort of an amalgam of law practice.
Right. But there's also...
as a successful lawyer, she's very successful because she is so demanding.
Right.
But she pretty much makes life miserable for those around her.
Mm-hmm. But it's interesting, if she was a man in that world...
True.
She may not have to be as forceful to be heard,
right.
etc. Right?
Right.
And so there is the element of that I really admire about her too.
Especially, Margaret at the time, the current action in the book is at middle age, but I think she learned these habits and patterns when a lot of women lawyers were coming up, and it was a very male-dominant business and profession.
Right. On the flip side of that, we have a character like Cam, who in a way I think is harder to pull off because she's so good, and it's really hard to pull off a really good character without them coming off as, I don't know, sentimental or smarmy or something. But she never comes across that way, and I'm not quite sure how you did that. And to me, that's a sign of good writing when you can't.
Well, thank you.
But she's also she's very human. But she just always has the best intentions. She's always trying to be the best person, the best friend, etc. that she can be. I feel the best daughter. Did you feel that way about her?
Well, I really like her. I think she is a good character. But I think she's also honest to Margaret.
Right.
She really tempers Margaret.
Yeah.
By not always being just kind, but by telling Margaret, she needs to loosen up a little bit.
And she's the only one that can get away with that.
Right,
too.
Right.
Yes. Well, let's talk a little bit about your influences. Who are your favorite writers overall, and are there writers in particular that you feel like influenced this particular work?
Well, I think that I am a huge fan of so many writers who have Kentucky and Appalachian connections. Of course, I love your books, Silas House, so that's an easy influence to recognize. Also, Bobby Ann Mason has been an influence on my writing and my reading because she also is a Western Kentuckian, and she has made stories set in similar communities as in my Drowned Town.
Yes.
She has made them come to life in her stories now, for since Shiloh came out in the early 80s. And so I think she's been a huge influence. This is a book of linked stories, or a novel in stories, I guess, if you want to call it that, too. And so that format of fiction has been important in my writing this book. So I have appreciated the writing of Elizabeth Strout and Olive Kittredge and Olive Again. I like that format of the linked stories because you can bring in so many different characters and tell their stories. They're all linked. All of my characters are linked to this place in Western Kentucky. But you get a view through a lot of different perspectives. I have an inmate at the Kentucky State Penitentiary who's seeing the lake rise after the dam is built. Also, an appraiser who is appraising land that is being condemned under the power of eminent domain between the rivers. So I'm trying to give a lot of different perspectives.
It's so smart to have that inmate, because he has little else to do but to watch the water rise, so
Right.
he's seeing it change over years, and it's such a
Right.
smart device in that way. Well, one thing about the book is you clearly have a deep love for Kentucky.
I do.
And like you said, it is very much set in Western Kentucky, but in lots of ways it encompasses the whole state and the South. And I think it's much more than a Kentucky story. It's an American story. It's so much about erasure and the way so many people have been removed and things like that.
Right.
We can think about women in that way. We can think about minorities in that way. There are people of color in your book and LGBT characters. And again, you're giving them voice. But I especially think the racial element in your book is so beautifully done because so few people think about a community of black people living in Western Kentucky.
Right.
And so I love that story
Right.
that looks at that. Do you want to talk a little bit about it?
Yes. A lot of people think of a very homogenized rural community, that's, but actually Western Kentucky, just like all of Kentucky and most rural places, it reflects, the American population. There are lots of, you can't generalize about the population. So I wanted to bring in, for that story, because there is historically a connection to the Between the Rivers, Land Between the Lakes area, because African Americans were resident there. They worked in the iron industry in Trigg and Lyon counties in Stewart County, Tennessee. So that history is very much a part of the history of Land Between the Lakes. And because when Land Between the Lakes became a recreation area, so much of the history, at least the tangible signs of what existed there before the recreation area, so many of those, there aren't very many remnants left. It was all torn down. All homes, businesses, churches, schools, everything was torn down when it became a recreation area to return it to it like a natural state. So I think it's important for us to take a look at that history and acknowledge it, that there were communities there, and we need to remember that.
Right. It's easy to go to a place like Land Between the Lakes and just think, oh, this is the virgin forest, right?
Exactly. Really, humans never lived here,
Yeah.
and that is that's a false impression.
Right. We are talking to Jayne Moore Waldrop about her new book, Drown Town, here on WUKY 91.3 FM, listener-supported radio. Well, Jayne, what about the influence of the Hyman Settlement School and Appalachian Writers Workshop? I should say that your book is published by the University Press of Kentucky, but it's under Hyman Settlement School's imprint, Fireside Industries. And
Yes.
full disclosure, I am the editor there, and so
Yes.
I edited this book. But I would say all of these nice things about it, even if I hadn't. So what did it mean to you to go to the Appalachian Writers Workshop?
It has made all the difference in the world in my writing, I think. My family's originally from Eastern Kentucky. I never lived there. They moved to Paducah right before I was born. So I am connected by my lineage to Appalachia and Eastern Kentucky, but I never lived there. But in going to and being a participant in the Appalachian Writers Workshop, I have found a community of complete support for my writing, and also the instruction through the workshop to write in a way that only I can write, to tell the stories that only I can tell, which that is a huge mark of encouragement to any newer writer.
Right. Yeah, there is this idea that writers are totally solitary creatures and all that. And I think that we do have some we obviously have to have some introspective and introverted traits, but like anybody else, we need community. And so I think a lot of people who are not writers don't think about how important community is to us as writers. And,
Right.
and we're so lucky here to have such a generous, not all places have such a generous writing community. Some of them are cutthroat communities. People have told me that from other states.
Right.
So I feel really lucky.
We are lucky. And, I just have had enormous support from both my teachers there and, the other participants, whether that means forming a writing group and we
Yes.
all exchange stories to comment on, and we do it all online because the workshop attracts people from New York and Nantucket and North Carolina and Oregon. So it's a really, really diverse group that comes, and you're given not only the skills but also encouraged to not necessarily write like anyone else there, but to find your place where you want to be telling these stories.
Right. Well, what have you been reading lately that you love? Of course, we want everybody to get a copy of your book, but can you give them another recommendation?
Well, I've been reading Perfect Black by Crystal Wilkinson, which just came out in August, I think. And it's a beautiful, beautiful book. I also, right now I've been reading the love songs of W.E.B. Du Bois.
That's quite a big book, isn't it?
It is.
Like
it's
900 pages?
It's a big book, and I'm almost done. It's
Wow.
been a really great read. I'm enjoying it a lot because it tells, again, a rural community story, also with some family members. It is truly like an epic kind of book, and it goes for many generations too. So I'm really intrigued by that format too. So I highly recommend it.
Yeah, great. What about music? Any music you've been loving lately?
Well, I've the Brandi Carlile new album, new release, and also I guess the last time I was down at the lakes, I do try to spend a lot of time there. Was listening to Sturgill Simpson, Juanita and the Dude out on the water,
really
and
like
that was I like that song a lot.
Yeah, it has a great
album.
dog song on it,
Yes.
Sam. It's hard to find a really good dog song, and that's a good one. One last thing I want to talk a little bit about is you capture lake life. And that's something that I don't think I've ever seen it in literature. I grew up very near Laurel Lake. We were always on the water. Yeah, we were called water dogs because we were just always skiing and swimming and on inner tubes and jumping out of trees into the water, off cliffs, doing things we shouldn't have been doing. Camping and fishing, and it's such a particular way of life. And there's one scene in particular I remember in Drowned Town where Cam's father is teaching Margaret how to ski.
Yeah.
And I have been witness to that so many times. It's like such a, when you're in the boat, it's a really frustrating and it seems to take forever, but then it's like such a jolt of adrenaline when somebody finally gets up, right, and skis.
Right.
And so just little things like that you capture.
Well, and I've tried to remember my own experience of learning how to water ski and how it's like, can I stop now?
Right.
I'm ready to get in the boat. And then I got up, and then I got up the next time.
It's little moments like that, that make it so real. But it's also serving the story because that sort of epitomizes the way that Margaret, as somebody who feels like she doesn't have much of a blood family, she has this created family.
Yes.
And that scene really just shows their patience with her and their love for her and her trust in them and the way that she's patient with them in a way she wouldn't be with anybody else. So
right. And she got something from that family that she had never gotten from her own parents. Right. And, like you said, the patience and the love and the, we're all in this together kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I always tell my students that any good piece of writing, it can't just be a well-written scene, and it can't just be fun or whatever. It also has to serve the heart of the story. And I think that's a good example of that, where you can sort of get just lost in it as a reader, thinking about how well you can see it in your mind's eye, but then later you realize how it is serving the heart of the book, right? So,
Okay. Thank you.
So thank you for writing such a lovely book, and thank you for joining us here today, Jayne. It's been a pleasure.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
I hope all of you will look for Jayne Moore Waldrop's Drowned Town, available wherever fine books are sold. And I hope you might join us next time here on The Porch. We're going to close with a song that makes me think of many of the themes going on in Drowned Town. It's Orange and Blue by Sarah Jarosz. Y'all be good to one another, and thanks for joining us. Thanks for listening to the podcast of On the Porch. I'm your host, Silas House. This episode was engineered and produced by DeBron Thomas at the studios of WUKY 91.3 FM in Lexington, Kentucky. We are listener-supported radio, and we thank you for joining us.